Hello writers, this is Mr. Raphael. In this video I'm going to focus on some information that's going to help you move forward with the rest of your story. The first video I made kind of helped you write the opening of your story, and most importantly it helped you kind of learn how to establish that historical context. As you continue to write the rest of the story, you're going to really need to keep in mind pacing, and you need to keep your story moving. So here are some things to consider when you're trying to keep your story moving. You know, you only have 750 words, so you can only include the most relevant and engaging details that will grab your reader's attention and tell the story that you need to tell. You're going to have to omit and delete the less important details. If you find that your word count's going to be over 750, right now that's not such a big deal, so keep those details in there, but as you get closer to the due date, you're going to have to go in and revise and delete those details. To keep the story moving, you'll have to know when can you summarize a less important part of your story, and when do you zoom in and write a lot more detail about the more important parts. You want to make sure that in your scenes you're always showing the reaction of your main character. Once you describe something that happens, you need to return that focus to the main character and show us how the main character reacts. Finally, you want to alternate between narration and dialogue. You should have more narration than dialogue because this is a story, it's not a script or a play, so when you do write your dialogue you have to keep it very limited and focused. Okay? So now we're going to take a look at how these elements show up in the story that I wrote for you. So in the scene that took place right before, in the part of the story that took place right before here, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Richard Henry Lee are all talking. And we know that Henry's about to give a speech in Congress. I say here we continued our conversation. There's no need for me to keep going with the dialogue. And I said what I needed to say, so I don't need to write any more dialogue. So this is an example of summarizing. Okay? And then it was time for Henry to address the delegation. Now, with 750 words, I do not have time to quote Henry's entire speech for my reader. Instead, I want to basically say that he delivered his speech, but the Congress did not adopt what he had to say. And this is how I do it. His words and passion did not disappoint. Heated debate followed. I'm not going to show the heated debate. I've already told you that there's tension going on. I don't have time to show that. But declaring independence from Britain was too radical for some delegates. So now I come back to Thomas Jefferson. How does he react to this? Angry but not discouraged. The three of us walked out of the State House and onto the cobblestone street as a cool night air fell upon the city. Okay? Well, what happens after this? Thomas Jefferson goes home. I could say I went home, but since this is historical fiction, I wanted to put a few details in here that make it historical. The Graff House is really the name of the house where he was renting some rooms. It is colonial time, so he didn't flip a switch and turn on the electricity. He lit a candle when he went inside. Okay, so these are also little ways to bring in that historical stuff. And then again here I kind of summarize how he spends his time at his home, at his residence. He snuffed the candle, retired to my bedchamber, and slipped into bed. Okay, nothing really important happens in that scene, so it's a summary. Now I need to keep the story moving, and I have to get Thomas Jefferson back to the Continental Congress. A good way to do that is to state a specific date and say what's happening on that date. On June 11th, I returned to the Second Continental Congress. I don't need 2 or 3 sentences describing how he went there, whether he walked there and took a carriage. That's not important. What's important is I get to the Continental Congress. Okay? That's basically a 1-sentence summary of how he got there. Okay? Next, we move into the Continental Congress. Okay? So I start off with a little dialogue here. What we need is a committee to draft an official written Declaration of Independence, John Adams urged. I wanted this scene to be here because I know eventually Thomas Jefferson starts writing the Declaration of Independence, but this scene happened, and this really did happen on June 11th. It's not like he just sat down one day and wrote the Declaration of Independence. Certain events unfolded before he did that, and this is one of those events that unfolded. Okay? And then I say who's on the committee. Now, once the committee members get together, my purpose is showing that Thomas Jefferson is the one who was given that responsibility, and I do that in just a few lines of dialogue. I could say that Thomas Jefferson was the one who was given the responsibility for writing the document. That's not so interesting. In this case, dialogue is more interesting, and I just keep it super focused and short. Okay? So now, to keep the story moving, now that he has this responsibility, what needs to happen? Well, he needs to start writing the Declaration of Independence. So that's where we move next. Okay? So for days, I toiled in seclusion in my parlor room. I would wake with the rising sun and have tea and morning biscuits. Then for hours, I wrote at my desk. With quill and ink, I set words to parchment. Notice that there's not a lot of wasted language here. I'm focusing on only the most important details, and a lot of the vocabulary speaks to colonial times. Okay? Before long, the document took shape and was complete. Now, since it is the Declaration of Independence, here's where I decided I do want to include some of the words, and I'm going to include the most famous words so the reader can read them. So here's that famous line about we hold these truths to be self-evident. I felt that was really important to include here. Okay? And now the last thing I just want to touch on here is, now that Thomas Jefferson has finished the document, I want to share his thought. I want to share his reaction. What does he think about this document that he just wrote? And I put here, this is a document that will change history, I thought. So in this short video, I've showed you how those elements I talked about help keep your story moving, and hopefully keeping these things in mind will help you continue with the rest of your draft. Okay, so again, good luck, writers, and write on.